She married a fat man for the sake of an argument, thinking she would win easily. But after a few months, her world turned upside down. Read and write where you're watching us from. Isabella Wright sat in her penthouse, high above the restless energy of Manhattan, the city lights flickering beneath her like scattered diamonds. The world below was hers, one of privilege, wealth, and influence. She was the daughter of a self-made real estate mogul, heir to a sprawling empire of luxury hotels and fine dining establishments, a woman who commanded respect with every step she took. She had never known scarcity, nor had she ever been denied anything she truly desired. At 38, Isabella was the epitome of success. She was not only beautiful, with her sharp, aristocratic features, piercing green eyes, and effortlessly styled blonde waves, but also formidable in business. She had spent the last decade proving to the world and to herself that she was more than just the heiress to a fortune. She was ruthless in negotiations, disciplined in her habits, and utterly in control of every aspect of her life. Despite this, there was an emptiness beneath the surface. Her life was a meticulously curated masterpiece, yet it felt sterile, predictable. Each morning began with sunrise yoga on the penthouse terrace, followed by a meticulously prepared breakfast of organic fruit and green juice, then a series of back-to-back meetings with investors, designers, and high-profile clients. The evenings were filled with charity galas, exclusive parties, and networking events where the same faces discussed the same elite concerns. Romance had always been transactional in her world. She had dated men of status, hedge fund managers, European aristocrats, tech billionaires, but none had ever truly mattered to her. Love, as she understood it, was a concept for the sentimental. In her world, relationships were alliances, built on mutual benefit, not passion or vulnerability. Tonight was yet another gala, this time for an exclusive charity event held at the Wright Tower, the flagship of her family's empire. The venue, a sleek and modern architectural marvel, had been transformed into a dazzling spectacle of crystal chandeliers, white-gloved waiters serving champagne, and guests draped in designer couture. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, her presence commanding attention. Conversations stopped when she approached, and when she spoke, people listened. It was the power she had cultivated, one that never failed her until tonight. She spotted her brother, Alexander Wright, leaning against the marble bar, swirling his whiskey lazily. Though only a year apart in age, Alex had never shared her drive. He enjoyed the family wealth without the burden of responsibility, content to live a life of pleasure and indulgence. Unlike Isabella, he found the world amusing rather than something to be conquered. "You always look like you're plotting world domination," he mused as she joined him. She smirked. "And you look like you're about to say something ridiculous." He chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink before tilting his head at her. "Tell me something, Izzy. Don't you ever get tired of all this?" She raised an eyebrow. "Define this." "The parties, the people, the endless cycle of being perfect." She gave him a pointed look. "Perfection is why I'm successful." Alex shrugged. "Sure, but it's also why you're predictable." She let out a soft laugh. "You think I'm predictable?" "I know you are," he said smugly. "Everything about your life is curated. Your business, your relationships, even your social circle. Everything and everyone fits into your world perfectly." She rolled her eyes. And, he continued, "I don't think you could handle something truly unpredictable. Someone who doesn't fit into your carefully designed reality." Her expression remained amused, but she was intrigued. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Alex's grin widened. A bet. That got her attention. Isabella was fiercely competitive. She had been since they were children, always needing to win, to prove herself superior. "I bet," Alex said, "that you can't marry someone completely outside of your world and make it last 6 months." She narrowed her eyes. "Marry?" "Marry," he confirmed. "Not just date. Not just a fling. A real marriage, no loopholes, no easy outs. Someone who doesn't belong here, someone who isn't part of our society, someone you would never even glance at." She studied him carefully. "And what do I get if I win?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "The control in shares of Wright Enterprises." The words sent a thrill through her. Their father had built the company, but since retiring, he had left the final control split between them. She ran the business, but Alex held enough power to block her decisions when it suited him. If she won, she would have complete autonomy. "And if I lose?" she asked. "You admit I was right," he said, smirking. "You admit that you can't adapt to something you can't control." She scoffed. "That's it? You want a confession?" "From you?" He chuckled. "That's worth more than money." She considered for a moment. The idea was absurd, but that only made it more enticing. A challenge, a game, and she never lost. "Fine," she said, extending her hand. "You have a deal." Alex shook her hand, grinning. "This is going to be fun." As she sipped her champagne, Isabella's mind was already racing. She would need to find someone who was the complete opposite of her world. Someone so far removed that it would satisfy the bet's conditions, but manageable enough that she could control the situation. It was only 6 months. How difficult could it be? Isabella was never one to hesitate once she had set her mind on something. The moment she and Alex shook hands on the bet, she had already begun strategizing. 6 months of marriage was nothing compared to what she would gain. Absolute control over Wright Enterprises, no longer needing to negotiate with her brother or prove herself to anyone. She had handled multi-million-dollar acquisitions, navigated complex negotiations, and outmaneuvered the most ruthless business titans. Finding a man to fit the conditions of this bet would be no different. All she needed was the right candidate, someone wholly removed from her world, but someone she could manage. The morning after the gala, she sat in her private study, a cup of black coffee in hand, flipping through the list of names her assistant had prepared. Sophia, a woman who had worked with her for years, had followed Isabella's instructions to the letter. The candidates included struggling artists, cab drivers, school teachers, and even a street musician. Each one was ordinary, unpolished, and completely unsuited for her elite social circle. Isabella scanned the names, but none of them intrigued her. They were too meek, too desperate. She needed someone she could control, but not someone who would become dependent on her. The arrangement had to be clean, free of emotional complications, a contract rather than a relationship. Frustration set in as she flipped through profile after profile, each one more uninspiring than the last. Just as she was about to toss the folder aside, a name caught her eye. James Miller, a 42-year-old mechanic who ran a small auto shop in Brooklyn. No elite education, no trust fund, no powerful connections. A man who worked with his hands, whose daily life was as far removed from hers as possible. She read through the report. He was large, over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, but more than that, he was heavy-set, something that would immediately set him apart in her world, where thinness and refinement were currency. He was known in his neighborhood for his generosity, often fixing cars for struggling families at reduced prices or for free. More interestingly, he was deeply involved with a local shelter, dedicating his free time to helping the homeless. He wasn't desperate. That was what made him stand out. He had his own life, his own beliefs, and he wasn't looking for a handout. That, Isabella decided, made him the perfect choice. Within an hour, her assistant had arranged a meeting. She wouldn't approach him as a woman looking for a husband. That would be ridiculous. Instead, she would frame it as a business proposition, something mutually beneficial. If there was one thing Isabella understood, it was how to make an offer impossible to refuse. She arrived at his garage later that afternoon. The contrast between her and her surroundings was almost comical. Dressed in an impeccably tailored ivory coat over a fitted black dress with designer heels clicking against the cracked pavement, she looked entirely out of place among the grease-stained floors and stacks of tires. James was in the middle of repairing an old sedan, his hands covered in oil. He barely spared her a glance before muttering, "You lost?" Isabella ignored the slight condescension in his tone and stepped closer. "I'm looking for James Miller." Now he looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. His dark brown eyes held a mix of curiosity and wariness. "That's me. Who's asking?" She extended her hand. "Isabella Wright." He didn't shake it. Instead, he leaned back against the car, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Wright? As in Wright Enterprises?" She was impressed that he knew. "Yes." His expression remained unreadable. "And what does a billionaire hotel heiress want with a guy who changes brake pads for a living?" Straight to the point. She appreciated that. "I'm here to discuss a proposal, one that could be beneficial to both of us." He raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I know you volunteer at St. Mark's Shelter. I also know that the funding is unstable and that you've been covering a lot of costs out of your own pocket." His jaw tensed slightly. "Where are you going with this?" "I want to offer you financial support for the shelter, enough to keep it running for years. In exchange, I need something from you." His skepticism deepened. "And what exactly would that be?" Isabella met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "A marriage." A long silence followed. The sounds of the garage, tools clanking, a radio playing softly in the background, filled the space between them. Then he laughed. A deep, genuine laugh, as if she had told the most ridiculous joke he had ever heard. "That's funny," he said, shaking his head. "Really. But seriously, what do you actually want?" She didn't flinch. "I'm not joking." His laughter faded, replaced by something more cautious. "You want me to marry you, a woman I've never met?" "Yes." "For what?" "That's not relevant," she said coolly. "What matters is that it's temporary, 6 months. You don't have to change your life, and you'll be well compensated." He studied her for a long time, his expression unreadable. "I don't need your money." "I'm not offering it for you," she countered. "I'm offering it for the people you help. You care about them, don't you?" That struck a nerve. She could see it in the way his posture shifted, in the flicker of emotion that passed through his eyes. He did care, deeply. Still, he didn't answer right away. He looked at her as if trying to gauge whether she was serious or if this was some elaborate joke. She held his gaze, refusing to waver. Finally, he exhaled, running a hand over his face. "This is insane." She allowed herself a small smile. "And yet, you're considering it." He sighed, shaking his head. "I don't trust you." "You don't have to." She extended a business card. "Think about it. You have 24 hours. James took the card but didn't look at it. He was still watching her, as if trying to decipher what kind of person would make such an outrageous proposal. As Isabella turned to leave, she knew she had already won. Because people like James, People who spent their lives given to others could never walk away from the chance to do more. She didn't need him to like her. She just needed him to say yes. And she was certain he would. James Miller had spent the last 24 hours grappling with the most ridiculous proposal he had ever received. Marriage to Isabella Wright, a billionaire hotel heiress with the composure of a queen and the presence of an avalanche, was absurd on every conceivable level. And yet, here he was, standing in front of the opulent high-rise that housed her penthouse, suitcase in hand, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He hadn't said yes lightly. When Isabella had left his garage, her high heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks in an unreadable sentence, James had been convinced he would say no. He didn't need her money. He didn't want to be tangled in some rich woman's game. But then he thought of the shelter. He thought of the families who came in seeking warmth during the brutal New York winters, the kids who clung to their mothers because they had nowhere else to go. He thought of the food shortages, the nights when he had to turn people away because there simply weren't enough beds. And he thought about how much of his own savings had gone into keeping it running. Her offer had been manipulative, sure, but she hadn't been wrong. He did care. And if 6 months of his life could ensure that the people he fought for had security, then what choice did he really have? So, against all logic, he had agreed. Now, standing in front of the sleek, glass-covered building, he felt like a complete fraud. He didn't belong here. He wasn't sure he even wanted to belong here. But he had made a deal, and he was a man who honored his word. The doorman, a stiff-looking man in a perfectly pressed suit, regarded him with barely concealed skepticism as he stepped inside. "Can I help you, sir?" James exhaled, gripping the handle of his suitcase a little tighter. "Yeah, I'm here for Isabella Wright." The doorman blinked, visibly struggling to reconcile the rugged, broad-shouldered mechanic in a worn-out jacket with the pristine world of Isabella Wright. After a brief hesitation, he stepped aside and gestured toward the elevator. "Penthouse level, sir." James nodded, stepping into the elevator, feeling distinctly like he was being sucked into another universe. The penthouse was exactly what he had expected. The moment the elevator doors slid open, he was met with towering glass windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a breathtaking view of the New York skyline. The place was all sleek surfaces, minimalist decor, and an eerie sort of perfection that made him feel even more out of place. Isabella was already waiting for him. She stood near the large marble kitchen island, arms crossed, dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored black pants, her blonde hair swept into an effortless updo. She didn't look surprised to see him. If anything, she looked satisfied. "You're late," she said. James raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't aware we set a time." She simply tilted her head toward a side hallway. "Your room is down that way, the guest suite." So they weren't even pretending to share a bedroom. Good. At least that meant she had no intention of playing house. He set his suitcase down and took a slow look around. "Nice place." "It serves its purpose," she replied coolly. "I assume you don't need a tour." "Not unless you're worried I'll get lost." That earned him a faint smirk before she gestured toward the kitchen. "I have rules, a lot of them. We will attend functions together when necessary. You will dress appropriately. You will not embarrass me in front of my associates. And this arrangement is strictly professional." "Understood?" James took a beat before answering. "Got it. Now, do I get to set any rules, or is this a dictatorship?" She didn't seem amused. "Your job is to stay out of my way. Do that, and we'll get through these 6 months just fine." James wasn't sure why he had expected anything different. Over the next few days, he quickly realized that their worlds weren't just different. They were entirely incompatible. Mornings in Isabella's life were regimented, starting with a perfectly portioned breakfast, a strict schedule, and back-to-back meetings that she conducted with razor-sharp efficiency. Meanwhile, James's mornings typically involved a large plate of pancakes, a strong cup of coffee, and figuring out which engine he'd be elbow-deep in for the day. Their first real conflict came over food. James had woken up early, rummaging through her oversized, state-of-the-art kitchen, only to find that her fridge was stocked with things he barely recognized: organic greens, imported cheeses, obscure health juices. He finally settled on making himself eggs and bacon. The smell of sizzling bacon filled the kitchen, and he was just about to dig in when Isabella walked in. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the plate like it had personally insulted her. "What is that?" He glanced down at his breakfast. "Food." She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "You're going to make the entire place smell like grease." He shrugged. "That's kinda how cooking works." She muttered something under her breath and grabbed a green juice from the fridge. "We have a chef for a reason." "Yeah, well, I'm not really the tiny gourmet portion type," James said, taking a bite. "I like real food. Then don't burn my kitchen down in the process." From there, things only escalated. She dragged him to a high-end tailor, where he stood stiffly as measurements were taken, feeling like a mannequin as they dressed him in a three-piece suit that cost more than his entire apartment. He took her to a small diner in Brooklyn one afternoon, just to see her reaction. She had stared at the laminated menu like it might bite her, then carefully ordered a black coffee, clearly repulsed by the idea of greasy burgers and milkshakes. At social events, she led him through rooms of Manhattan's elite, introducing him with smooth, calculated charm, while he struggled not to laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. They were oil and water. But what surprised James the most wasn't how different they were. It was how unshakable Isabella was in her belief that she could control everything, even him. And maybe, for the first time, she had met someone who wouldn't be controlled. Late one evening, after yet another silent, tense dinner, James leaned against the balcony railing, watching the city below. Isabella stood beside him, arms crossed, her gaze distant. "This isn't working," he finally said. She didn't look at him. "What isn't?" "This." He gestured between them. "You acting like you can just shove me into your world and I'll fall in line." She was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. "You knew what you were signing up for." "Yeah," he admitted, "but I don't think you did." She turned to him then, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "You don't just get to throw money at a problem and expect it to fit into your life. That's not how people work." Isabella's expression remained unreadable, but for the first time she didn't immediately counter him. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize that this arrangement wasn't going to be as simple as she had planned. The tension in the penthouse had only grown since James moved in. Every interaction between him and Isabella felt like a battlefield, small, precise skirmishes in an ongoing war of control. Neither of them backed down easily, and while they both tolerated the arrangement for the sake of the deal, the cracks in their fragile truce deepened by the day. James wasn't interested in playing the role of a high-society husband, and Isabella had no patience for his casual, unrefined ways. They rarely spoke beyond what was necessary, and when they did, their conversations were sharp-edged, filled with mutual exasperation. So, when James invited Isabella to visit St. Mark's shelter, she was caught off guard. At first, she had refused outright. The idea of stepping into his world, one so far removed from the pristine, controlled environments she was used to, made her uncomfortable. But James had been persistent, and after days of him reminding her that she had dragged him into her life without choice, she finally relented. The drive to Brooklyn was silent. Isabella sat in the back seat of her luxury car, legs crossed, arms folded, watching the city pass by as if she were being dragged to some sort of punishment. James, sitting beside her, was more relaxed, though there was an air of quiet anticipation about him. When they finally arrived, Isabella stepped out of the car and looked around. The shelter was nothing like the refined, charity gala-funded organizations she had donated to in the past. It was a modest, aging building with peeling paint and a faded sign over the entrance. The street was lined with people, some huddled together for warmth, others carrying what little they owned in battered bags. For the first time in a long time, Isabella felt out of place. Inside, the air smelled of food and antiseptic. Volunteers moved quickly, distributing meals, folding donated clothes, and speaking with residents who looked worn by life. Unlike the sleek corporate spaces she was used to, this place was alive, chaotic but purposeful. James moved through the space with ease, greeting people by name, asking about their families, their situations. She watched as a young woman, barely more than a teenager, approached him with a toddler on her hip. "We got a spot for you in the transitional housing program," James told her with a reassuring smile. "You'll have a real roof over your head by the end of the week." The girl's relief was immediate. "Thank you, James," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much." Isabella felt something stir inside her, an unfamiliar discomfort. She had attended countless charity events, had signed off on millions of dollars in donations to organizations across the country, but she had never seen the direct impact of those funds. She had never been in the same room as the people her money was supposedly helping. James noticed her hesitation. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the kitchen. "You wanted to see what I do? Let's get to work." Work? She had expected to simply observe, maybe write a check at the end of it. But now she found herself standing behind a counter, a volunteer handing her a ladle, instructing her to help serve food. The first plate she filled was handed to an elderly man with trembling hands. He looked up at her, meeting her eyes, and gave her a smile. "Bless you, miss," he said before shuffling away. She swallowed hard. This was nothing like the charity world she knew. There were no photographers documenting her presence, no donors networking over champagne. There was only need, raw, undeniable need, and people trying their best to meet it. By the time the evening ended, Isabella felt drained in a way she couldn't quite explain. Her mind was racing with thoughts she didn't want to entertain, and her body ached from the unaccustomed labor. James walked beside her as they exited the shelter, the night air crisp and biting against her skin. "You held up better than I expected," he admitted. She shot him a look. "Don't patronize me." He smirked. "I mean it. I thought you'd bail halfway through." "So did I," she muttered, more to herself than to him. As they drove back to the penthouse, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that for the first time in a long while, she had stepped outside of herself and seen something real. But instead of embracing that realization, she felt defensive. The next morning, over coffee, the tension between them boiled over. James had made himself comfortable at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, while Isabella meticulously spread jam over her toast. "You seemed different last night," James commented without looking up. "Almost human." She stiffened. "I don't need your approval." "It wasn't approval," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "It was an observation. You saw something you weren't expecting, didn't you?" She hated how easily he could see through her. "I saw a lot of things," she said coolly, "none of which change the fact that money is still the most effective way to help those people." James set down his coffee. "That's where you're wrong." She arched an eyebrow. "Oh, so now you're lecturing me on philanthropy." "I'm saying that you can't just throw money at a problem and think that fixes it," he replied. "Those people need more than donations. They need people who actually give a damn." She bristled. "I give a damn." "Do you?" he challenged. "Or is this just another box to check off on your list of accomplishments?" Her grip on her fork tightened. "I built my life on discipline and control. I don't have the luxury of playing savior like you do." James let out a short laugh. "You think I have the luxury. I work 12-hour days at a garage and still show up at that shelter because I know what it's like to have nothing. You don't." His words hit harder than she wanted to admit. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need to justify myself to you." James leaned back in his chair, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite place. "No, you don't. But maybe you should ask yourself why you feel like you do." She turned on her heel and left the room before she could say something she'd regret. For the rest of the day, she tried to bury herself in work, throwing herself into meetings and business deals, but something about their argument lingered. That night, as she sat alone in the penthouse, sipping a glass of wine, she found herself thinking about the girl at the shelter, about the way James had spoken to her, not like a benefactor, but like someone who truly saw her. It unsettled her. She didn't like feeling unsettled, but even as she told herself she would forget about it, she knew she wouldn't. Because James had been right about one thing. She had seen something she wasn't expecting, and it had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Isabella prided herself on compartmentalization. She had built an entire life around the ability to separate emotion from action, personal from professional, self from others. It was why she was a success, why she had never allowed herself to be distracted by sentimentalities or unnecessary attachments. Yet, for the past week, she had been unable to shake the unease James had planted in her. It wasn't just the argument itself. It was the way he had looked at her, like he had seen through every layer of carefully cultivated indifference, like he had exposed something in her she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself that their marriage was still just an arrangement. But she couldn't stop thinking about the shelter, about the girl clutching her child, eyes brimming with relief at James's words, about the old man who had thanked her so earnestly, as if she had actually done something meaningful. She had spent years at charity events, listening to figures and statistics, nodding at well-dressed executives who promised change. But she had never once felt what she had felt that night at the shelter. Something raw, something uncomfortable, something real. Instead of acknowledging it, she buried herself deeper in work. She attended every meeting, every event, focusing on deals that needed to be closed and investments that needed securing. She surrounded herself with luxury, with the familiar comfort of control. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she couldn't shake the hollowness. James, of course, noticed. She saw it in the way he watched her when they passed each other in the penthouse. the way his usual smirks and jabs had softened into something quieter. He never said anything outright, but she could feel his silent scrutiny, like he was waiting for her to acknowledge something she wasn't ready to face. Then, one evening, without overthinking it, she made a decision. She had her driver take her to the shelter. She didn't tell James. She didn't call ahead. She just arrived, stepping out of the car with the same confidence she carried into corporate boardrooms. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt the weight of unfamiliarity press against her. Unlike last time, James wasn't there to buffer the experience. This time, she was alone. Just another stranger stepping into a space that didn't belong to her. A woman at the front desk looked up, blinking in surprise. "Can I help you?" Isabella hesitated for only a moment before straightening her shoulders. "I was here last week. She almost said she came with James, but that felt like an excuse. "I wanted to see how things were running." The woman gave her a measured look before nodding toward the back. "We can always use help in the food pantry." Help? Isabella didn't remember the last time she had been expected to actually do something with her hands, but instead of brushing it off, she simply nodded. She spent the next 2 hours sorting through donations, packing bags of food, and listening to the quiet hum of conversation around her. No one treated her like a CEO. No one fawned over her name. She was just another pair of hands, just another person trying to be useful. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was playing a part. She didn't realize how much time had passed until she stepped out into the cold air and found James leaning against her car, arms crossed. "You're late," he said. She frowned. "I didn't tell you I was coming." "No, but I figured you might." She studied him, searching for mockery, but found none. Just curiosity. "I don't know what you expect me to say," she admitted. "I don't expect anything," he said simply. "But I know you, Isabella. You don't do things without a reason." She could have brushed him off. She could have walked past him, gotten into the car, and pretended none of this mattered. But instead, she exhaled. "I don't know why I came," she admitted. "I just couldn't stop thinking about it." James watched her for a long moment before nodding. Good. Good. The word unsettled her. She didn't ask what he meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. For the next few weeks, Isabella found herself falling into an odd routine. She would attend her usual business meetings, manage her investments, and maintain her perfectly curated public image. But in the evenings, when the penthouse felt too big and too empty, she would drive to the shelter. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't make grand declarations about change. She simply worked, packing food, talking to volunteers, listening to the stories of the people who came in seeking help. And slowly, without her realizing it, something inside her began to shift. She started asking questions. Real questions. She learned the names of the families who relied on the shelter. She learned about the struggles of single mothers trying to find stable work, about the elderly who had been discarded by the system, about the children who had never known security. She had spent years believing that money was the solution to everything, that efficiency and logic were all that mattered. But here, among people who had nothing, she was starting to see that solutions weren't just about funding. They were about presence. And that terrified her. James never pushed her for explanations, but she could tell he noticed. He still teased her, still made offhanded remarks about her adjusting to real life, but there was something gentler beneath it now. A quiet understanding. One evening, she sat across from him at the kitchen table, both of them eating in rare silence. Finally, she spoke. "You were right." James glanced up. About what? She hesitated. About the shelter. About people needing more than just money. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just nodded. Yeah, that was it. No lecture, no speech, just an acknowledgement. And somehow that made it feel more real. But even as she began to change, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming. Because while she might have started to see James in a different light, while she might have begun to respect him in ways she never expected, there was still one thing she hadn't told him. The bet. The real reason she had married him. And, as much as she wanted to believe that she could keep it hidden, some part of her knew the truth would come out. And when it did, everything she had built in these past few weeks would come crashing down. The weight of the secret pressed heavier on Isabella with each passing day. She had always been good at managing risk, at controlling outcomes, at keeping her emotions firmly locked away. But this was different. This wasn't just a business deal or a calculated decision. This was real, and it was slipping further out of her control. For weeks now, her life had been split into two distinct halves. There was the Isabella the world saw, the poised businesswoman, the confident executive who commanded respect and admiration. And then there was the Isabella who spent late nights at the shelter, who listened to people's stories, who had begun to question everything she had once believed about success and value. And at the center of it all was James. She hadn't expected to respect him. She hadn't expected to care. But she did, and that was a problem. Because no matter how much she wanted to ignore it, there was still a contract binding them together. A wager she had made in arrogance. A bet she had never truly expected to lose. She told herself she had time. She told herself she could figure out a way to fix it. But the truth came out in the worst possible way. It was an otherwise ordinary evening. She had just returned from a meeting, stepping into the penthouse to find James sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. There was nothing unusual about it, until she saw the look on his face. Tense, guarded, like he already knew something. She hesitated. "What's wrong?" James didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his phone toward her, and when she saw what was on the screen, her stomach dropped. It was an article, a business column dissecting the Wright family empire, and buried within it a single paragraph that made her blood run cold. It was speculation, but speculation based on truth. Sources suggest that Isabella Wright's recent marriage is tied to an internal family bet, one that, if successful, would grant her full control over Wright Enterprises. While unconfirmed, whispers within Manhattan's elite suggest that her choice of husband may have been more strategic than sentimental. Silence stretched between them. James set the phone down and met her gaze. "Tell me it's not true." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Jesus, Isabella." She forced herself to stay composed. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" His voice was tight, clipped. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty simple. You needed a husband for 6 months, so you found someone convenient. You found me." Her throat tightened. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me how it was," he challenged. "Tell me what part of this wasn't a game to you." She wanted to. God, she wanted to. She wanted to tell him that somewhere along the way, things had changed. That he wasn't just a bet anymore. That he had become the only person who made her question everything she had built her life around. But how could she expect him to believe that? So instead, she said nothing. And the silence was worse than any answer she could have given. James let out a bitter laugh. "I should have known," he muttered. "I should have known that none of this was real." It was real, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. He shook his head. No, it was convenient. And you had the nerve to stand in that shelter to talk to those people, to act like you actually gave a damn, while the whole time this was just another one of your power moves. His words hit harder than she expected, because they weren't just angry, they were hurt. I didn't, she exhaled, running a hand through her hair. I didn't think it would be like this. He let out a hollow laugh. Like what? Like I'd actually matter? She flinched. James shook his head. I don't know why I'm surprised. I should have seen it from the start. She wanted to stop him, to say something, to fix it, but there was nothing left to say. And then, with the quiet finality of someone who had already made up his mind, he picked up his jacket. I'm done, Isabella. The words sent a jolt through her chest. Her composure cracked. James! No. He turned to face her, eyes dark with something she couldn't quite name. I might not come from your world, but I'm not some chess piece for you to move around. I don't care about your money. I don't care about your company. But I did care about what I thought we were building. And the worst part, I actually believed it meant something. She wanted to tell him that it did, that he meant something, but she had lost the right to say those words. Without another glance, he walked out the door, and this time she knew he wasn't coming back. The penthouse felt unbearably silent in his absence. For the first time in her life, Isabella Wright had gotten everything she wanted, and for the first time in her life, she had never felt emptier. The next few days passed in a blur. She went through the motions, meetings, calls, press appearances. She smiled when she was supposed to smile, nodded when she was supposed to nod. But none of it mattered. James was gone, and no amount of control could change that. She told herself it was fine, that she would move on, that she would forget. But then she caught herself glancing at the chair he used to sit in, at the empty space in the kitchen where he used to make his absurdly large breakfasts. She caught herself missing the way he challenged her, the way he never backed down. She caught herself missing him. And that terrified her, because Isabella Wright didn't lose. But, for the first time, she wasn't sure if winning was worth it. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. It had been days since James walked out, but his absence lingered like a weight she couldn't shake. Isabella had always prided herself on her ability to move on, to cut away what no longer served her and continue forward without looking back. That was how she had built her success, by being ruthless, efficient, and in control. But this time, she couldn't move on. The problem wasn't just that James had left, it was that she had given him every reason to, and now, no matter how much she wanted to pretend otherwise, she had to confront the truth. She had built her world around winning, around being the smartest, the strongest, the most prepared. But what good was winning when she had lost the one person who had made her see the world differently? She wasn't ready to admit how much it mattered. But she knew one thing. She couldn't let things end like this. At first, she did what she always did when something went wrong. She tried to fix it with money. She had her assistant arrange a meeting with the director of St. Mark's Shelter. She increased her donations, made sure the shelter had everything it needed for the next several years. New supplies, an expansion project, full funding. It was the kind of solution that had always worked before. But this time it didn't feel like enough. Because money wasn't what had driven James away. It had been her. And throwing money at the problem wasn't going to bring him back. That realization hit her harder than she expected. For the first time in her life, Isabella didn't know how to fix something. So she did something she never did. She listened. She went to the shelter not as a benefactor or a businesswoman, but as a person trying to understand. She sat with the volunteers, asked questions, learned their stories. She watched how they worked, not just the way they provided meals or shelter, but the way they built trust. She spent hours speaking with the families who relied on the shelter. She listened to their fears, their hopes, their struggles, and, for the first time, she didn't see them as numbers on a financial report. She saw them as people. It was uncomfortable. It was humbling. And it was real. James wasn't there. She hadn't expected him to be, but his presence was everywhere. She saw it in the way the volunteers spoke about him, in the way the people at the shelter trusted him. He had built something here, something far greater than money. And she had almost destroyed it. She didn't know if he would ever forgive her. But she knew one thing. She couldn't let her pride stop her from trying. So she found him. It wasn't hard. She knew him well enough now to know where he would be. He was at his garage, as always, his sleeves rolled up, hands covered in grease, focused on an engine like the rest of the world didn't exist. For a long moment, she just watched him. She had spent so much time trying to fit him into her world, trying to control the way he moved through it. But standing there, watching him work, she realized something. She had never truly tried to understand his. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You're persistent," he said. She exhaled. "I need to talk to you." He wiped his hands on a rag, sighing. "Is this about the shelter? Because if you're here to tell me about some big donation, I don't need to hear it." "It's not about the money," she said. That made him pause. She hesitated, then admitted, "I've been going there, the shelter, not to donate, to work." His expression flickered with something she couldn't quite read. "You?" he asked. She nodded. I thought I understood what mattered, but I didn't. Not really." He studied her for a long moment. "And now you do?" "I'm trying to," she said honestly. Silence stretched between them. For the first time since he left, she felt uncertain. Not because she feared losing control, but because she genuinely didn't know what he would say. Then, finally, he sighed. "You don't just get to show up and expect things to go back to how they were," he said. She nodded. "I know." "You lied to me, Isabella." "I know," she repeated, softer this time. He looked at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "Why are you really here?" She could have said a dozen different things, but for the first time she didn't try to manipulate the outcome. "I miss you," she admitted. The words hung between them, heavier than she expected. James didn't answer right away, but he didn't walk away either. And for now, that was enough. She hadn't won, but maybe, just maybe, she had taken the first step towards something better. The days that followed were slow and uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Isabella didn't try to control them. She didn't push James for an answer. She didn't try to force things back to how they had been before. Instead, she let time do what it needed to do. She kept going to the shelter, not for him, not to prove anything, but because she had come to realize she wanted to be there. She wanted to be part of something that wasn't about power or control or winning. She wanted to understand the world beyond her own. And slowly, things began to shift. James didn't rush to forgive her, but he didn't shut her out completely either. Some days they spoke in passing, small conversations that felt almost normal. Other days he barely looked at her, the weight of the past still heavy between them. But he never told her to leave. And that was something. The night of the new community center's opening, Isabella arrived early, dressed not in one of her usual designer ensembles, but in something simple. She wasn't here as a guest of honor. She wasn't here to be seen. She was just here. The center was bustling with energy. Families filtering in, volunteers moving quickly to set up food stations, medical checkups, and job assistance booths. The entire event was a testament to what the shelter had been working toward for years. And for once, Isabella wasn't thinking about the money behind it. She was thinking about the people. She spotted James across the room, talking to a group of volunteers, his posture relaxed, his deep laugh carrying through the air. For a moment, she just watched him. He belonged here. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could too. She didn't approach him right away. Instead, she spent the evening helping where she could, handing out plates of food, sitting with an older woman who told her about the struggles of finding stable housing after losing her job. Isabella listened, really listened, and for the first time she didn't feel out of place. Near the end of the night, James finally approached her. She turned to him, unsure of what to expect. "You stuck around," he said simply. She nodded. "I wanted to." He studied her for a moment, then exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know what to do with you, Isabella." She let out a small, dry laugh. "I don't know what to do with me either." That, at least, made him smile. There was a long silence before she finally spoke again. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if you should. But I wanted you to know that I see things differently now." He didn't say anything right away. Then, finally, he nodded. "Good," he said. And somehow that single word felt like the most important thing he had ever said to her. She didn't know what would happen next. Maybe they would find their way back to each other. Maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time in her life, Isabella Wright wasn't afraid of the unknown. For the first time, she was okay with not having all the answers. She had spent her entire life believing that control was the key to happiness. But standing here in the middle of a crowded community center, watching James laugh with people who had once had nothing, she realized something. Happiness wasn't about control. It was about showing up. And for the first time, she was ready to do just that. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next ones. Check out our other videos for more captivating stories, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. See you in the next one.